Grab your favorite beverage. It's time for the Beers and Bruisers Fantasy Football Podcast.
Fantasy freaks and geeks, what's up? I'm Matt McPeak. This is the Beers and Bruisers Fantasy Football Podcast. I'm riding solo today. Adam had some work things he had to take care of, but no fear. I got some good stuff we're going to break down today. We're going to dive into the teams with new play callers on offense and who should see the most benefit from those new play callers. And then we'll break down the tight ends for this year, look at the top 20 or so, and see what we got going on this year at tight end. It's an interesting position. I feel like it's kind of the wild card position of fantasy football, so we'll get into that. I'm going to hopefully do another episode tomorrow. Tonight's episode is going to obviously be pretty short, but hopefully tomorrow we'll get another episode in. That will give us 3 before the season starts. There's a lot of injured players from last year I want to talk about. Some guys that are even showing those injuries here in the preseason. One guy, I think, for example, is Cam Newton. He's already dealing with a foot sprain, as it is, I guess. We're also going to look at some guys that moved teams in free agency over the offseason, or guys that were traded, and look at their new situations on their new teams, see who's in a good spot, see who's in maybe not as good of a spot as they were. And then we're hopefully going to take a look at some DSTs from last year that hopefully should see some improvement. Obviously, for fantasy football, the worse the defenses are, the better. But there's some people out there that really value those DSTs. So we're going to take a look at that too. It'll impact the way we look at matchups in the beginning of the season. It's always so hard looking at matchup info from last season, this season, trying to figure out what's a good matchup week one, because it feels like week one is kind of a playoff game. So never really take into account those matchups. Can't really put too much weight on them, but let's get right into it. Let's start with what I think is the most exciting coaching change in the offseason, and I'm not talking about Cliff Kingsbury going to Arizona. I'm talking about Bruce Arians going to the Buccaneers. He brings with him offensive coordinator Byron Leftwich. He'll call the plays, but I'm sure Arians will be giving the okay on every play, and he's going to have his stamp on every game plan, and he's going to be involved with all the mid-game adjustments and all that. So although Leftwich is technically the offensive coordinator, it's going to be Arians calling the shots. This offense ranked third last year, and although they have to replace Deshaun Jackson and Adam Humphries, they still have one of the best wide receiver groups in football when you consider Mike Evans and Chris Godwin, along with their tight ends like Jordan Howard. Dude, super talented. And surprising to me, going back through Arians' offenses, the RBs may stand to get the biggest boost from being in this new Arians offense. If you go back in 2007, so all these running backs I'm about to name all had over 1,000 total yards with Bruce Arians. So in 2007, the Steelers, you're looking at Willie Parker. In 2009 to 2011, Rashad Mendenhall did it 3 times. 2014, Andre Ellington had 1,000 total yards. 2015, David Johnson. That was his rookie year. He was amazing that season. Or no, I'm sorry, it was 2016 that he had where he had over 2,000 total yards. But back to 2015, even Chris Johnson had 872 total yards. 2017, Adrian Peterson had 514 yards in 6 games. So, if you span that over the entire season, if he had played the entire season, that's another 1,000-yard back there. So running backs seem to really thrive in this system. the Bucs have an interesting collection of running backs, to say the least. Trying to figure out who's going to be the most likely to continue the trend is pretty tough, but the youngest and probably still the most athletic running back on the team is 38th overall pick from last year, Ronald Jones. He had one of the most disappointing seasons last year for a rookie, but it seems like if there's one coaching staff, one system that can get the most out of him, it's probably this one. So pretty exciting for those players in Tampa Bay. Let's go to the next team, the aforementioned Arizona Cardinals, with their new head coach, Cliff Kingsbury, who will be calling plays in what he calls his air raid offense. It's going to be lots of option routes and crossing routes, RPOs. We're going to see that zone read with David Johnson and Kyler Murray, which is probably going to be pretty cool. I don't expect to see many throws deep. I don't know if they're going to have enough time, frankly, to get the ball down deep to let those routes develop with that offensive line they had. It could be just as bad as it was last year. Honestly, I'm giving a slight downgrade to David Johnson because although we generally see running backs get a slight uptick in value when they have a quarterback that can run, it just seems like this offense is really going to be a mismatch. I don't want to call it a mismatch, but it's hard to figure out what it's going to look like. This whole preseason, they haven't shown us anything, and obviously David Johnson's going to be involved in the passing game. He's still going to be a top 5 running back. I'm just saying, if I have the first overall pick, even first through 4. David Johnson is number 4 to me. I'm going Kamara, I'm going McCaffrey, and I'm going Zeke over David Johnson. But he's still going to be an awesome player, so he's still going to be fun to watch. Another offense that has changed play callers. Former Buccaneers head coach Dirk Cutter is now going back to the Falcons. And, as I said before, last year the Bucs offense was they were putting up serious numbers. They had a loaded wide receiver group with Mike Evans and Chris Godwin, Deshaun Jackson, Adam Humphries, and this year he gets to play with Julio. He gets Calvin Ridley as a number 2, Mohamed Sanu, plus he's got a big tight end in Austin Hooper, which Cutter is known to be great at scheming plays together, especially in the red zone for tight ends. If you look back at Mercedes Lewis in 2010, Tony Gonzalez 2012 and 2013, and yeah, I know it's Tony Gonzalez, but still. Austin Seferian-Jenkins and Cameron Brate in 2015 both had pretty good seasons as a tight end in this system. So, I think Austin Hooper could be a steal at tight end. I'm putting together my boards, and I got the guys that the top end tight ends that I'm looking for. But if I miss on them, and I gotta kind of redo my tight end strategy mid draft, I'm pretty much going to account for taking Austin Hooper late because he's one of the safest tight ends. He's not going to be a guy that's going to get you top 5 tight end numbers consistently, but he's going to have plenty of weeks where he puts up numbers. Beer, it's delicious. Sorry if I'm a little sidetracked here. I got the Met game on my iPad over here, and of course they're losing, so that's fantastic. But anyway, we got football. We got football here anyway. So with the Ravens, we got former tight ends coach Greg Roman. He's promoted to offensive coordinator, and every time we see a position group promoted to offensive coordinator, I always feel like you always see a slight uptick in the use of that position. So, for example, with the Ravens, we're going to see these tight ends used. They also have 3 really good ones, including a first-round pick from last year in Hayden Hurst, who didn't really get to play that much. He was dealing with, I think it was like a foot injury, something. So between him and Mark Andrews and there's a couple other ones. We'll get into tight ends when we're done getting through these teams with new play callers. But I expect to see the tight ends used a little bit more. I mean, obviously with this Ravens offense, they're going to be running the ball and they're going to be taking shots down the field on play action with these tight ends running down the seams, and with new speedster Hollywood Brown, who's probably going to be running some goes pretty consistently. So Those are the guys I see benefiting the most from this change with the Ravens. Another team that has a new exciting head coach, former Rams quarterback coach Zach Taylor, comes from the Sean McVay 11 personnel offensive mindset. The Rams used that 11 personnel, which, if you're not familiar, is 1 running back, 1 tight end, 3 wide receivers. They used it 96% of the time last year. Pretty ridiculous. You look at the guys that they had in on the Rams last year. You're looking at Woods, Kupp, Cooks. I think the group of A.J. Green, Tyler Boyd, and the speedster John Ross, will produce close to those numbers. I don't know about the same, but I think they could easily put up relatively close numbers. It's a pretty solid group of receivers when you look at their individual talents and you compare them to that of the Rams last year. I mean, Green compares pretty well to Woods, even as he's getting older here. Tyler Boyd, I think, can play the role of Cooper Kupp, and obviously John Ross can run those deep routes that Cooks has kind of been running for some of the best offenses over the past couple of years. If you remember, 2 years ago he was on the Patriots, and then the year before that he was on the Saints, so he's played in some pretty high-powered offenses. The one group that definitely suffers here is the tight ends, who are used more as run blockers than anything else. The RPOs and the jet sweeps and the quick screens, that's not stuff you're really targeting tight ends for, but it should help Boots Mixon and John Ross the most, I'd say, out of these 3 wide receivers. I feel like John Ross has kind of been the forgotten guy on that offense. He was drafted, one of these super elite speed guys, and just hasn't really put it together. He had a couple games last year were pretty well, but I think this guy Zach Taylor can bring out the best in him, and obviously Joe Mixon should see close to the same workload that I think they gave Todd Gurley. Joe Mixon is obviously talented enough to take that workload. Whether he's talented enough to produce as much as Todd Gurley, we'll have to wait and see. But he's definitely a talented running back that I think this dude Zach Taylor's gonna love having to use in his new system. So moving on to the Denver Broncos, former 49ers. Wow, that was weird. 49ers quarterback coach Rick Scangarello, I think is how you say it. He helped the third quarterback going into the season last year for the 49ers, Nick Mullins, who started, like I say, he started as the third quarterback going into the season, and then midway through the season, he's the starter, and he finishes the season out. Obviously we saw Garoppolo go down, and we saw C.J. Beathard go down, and he played pretty well. So I think with him being there, he's also going to help develop the wide receivers that they got, Cortland Sutton and Deshaun Hamilton there in Denver. If you remember the past couple of years, the 49ers have been stockpiling some young wide receiver talent, Marquise Goodwin, Dante Pettis. So these wide receivers, I think, are gonna see the most uptick in value with this new quarterback coach now playing, calling plays there in Denver. They're still going to be a run-heavy team. They're still going to rely on their defense and that zone blocking scheme that has been the staple of a Denver offense for years now, even when Peyton was there. So, it should be pretty good for those wide receivers there in Denver. The next team is the Lions. They bring on Darrell Bevell, and he brings with him a very balanced approach from Seattle, which should help keep Kerryon Johnson on the field more and should help quarterback Matthew Stafford from having to do everything, which is what he's had to do for years there. I think Stafford value might take a small hit just because of how balanced they will be, but as far as efficiency goes, I think Stafford should be a hell of a lot more efficient than he's been. But the tight end group, again, it seems like a lot of these guys are big into their tight ends. They should see the most benefit. For whatever reason, during Bevell's tenure in Seattle, tight ends averaged 102 targets for 64 receptions and 775 yards throughout the season. They just went out and signed Jesse James. They drafted T.J. Hawkinson. They got a pretty good set of tight ends now, and I think we're going to see another one of these offenses with the two tight end schemes. I think Jesse James and T.J. Hawkinson can do some serious damage, especially considering the other wide receivers that they have there with Marvin Jones, Kenny Golladay, two huge guys. And then, as I mentioned, Kerryon Johnson he showed last year he's a great running back, and he can do some pretty special things. So look for that Lions offense to be much more balanced this year with Darrell Bevell joining the ranks there. So moving on to the Green Bay Packers with the new head coach Matt LaFleur. A lot has been made in this offseason about the relationship between Aaron Rodgers and Mike McCarthy, and now with a new head coach, whether Rodgers is still coachable at this point. But he's another guy from the Sean McVay tree. So just like Zach Taylor on the Bengals, expect to see a lot of this 11 personnel. You're going to see a lot of guys in motion. You're going to see a lot of play actions and bootlegs, which has always been a part of Aaron Rodgers' offense. He looks as good as anybody running out on a bootleg and bombing it. How many times have we seen Hail Marys with Aaron Rodgers? Pretty amazing stuff. So the ball may get spread around a little bit more than we've seen in a Aaron Rodgers-led offense. I mean, he obviously loves Devontae Adams, as he should. He's a great wide receiver. And I think Devontae will still get his targets. I just think it's going to be a lot more efficient there in Green Bay. And hopefully these two, Matt LaFleur and Aaron Rodgers, can coexist because, if we can put that Rams offense with Aaron Rodgers, it's going to be pretty amazing to watch. So I'm excited about that for sure. Another team with a new offensive coordinator here is the Jacksonville Jaguars. This one confuses me a little bit. The Jaguars brought on John DeFilippo, who was the offensive coordinator in Minnesota last year and was fired mid-season because apparently he wasn't running the ball enough. There were reports about head coach Mike Zimmer there going to him and saying, we need to run the ball more. You're throwing the ball way too much. And I guess he just didn't want to do it, and he got fired. And for a team like Jacksonville that obviously wants to, as they say, get off the bus running the ball, it's kind of strange to bring on a guy that, maybe has the reputation as being someone who's a little too pass-heavy. But we'll see how it works. I mean, the one good thing about this, and the one thing that kind of makes a little bit of sense, is the fact that they signed Nick Foles in the offseason, or if it was a trade, I forget. But they attained Nick Foles, and who was with Nick Foles when he went on that Super Bowl run as the quarterback's coach? None other than John DeFilippo. So that obviously they are going to be comfortable with one another. I think Foles will be able to run this offense no problem. And obviously it's not going to be the same offense because, like I was trying to say with the whole running aspect of this, they got one of the best running backs in the game, one of the most violent runners in the game. Leonard Fournette should see plenty of touches. I don't think that that the Jaguars have any aspirations of getting away from that. They've been investing in their offensive line for a couple years now. They know what they have in Leonard Fournette, and if he could stay on the field, if he could stay healthy, if he can, keep himself from getting in trouble and getting suspended, the dude is an absolute beast. The next team is the Dolphins. Brian Flores, longtime Patriots assistant and last season's defensive coordinator, steps in as the head coach, and he brings with him Patriots wide receiver coach to call plays. Because of the talent on this team, honestly, I'm not sure this one really matters. The Dolphins are a team that I am completely and utterly avoiding on draft day, especially since the reports that really the only fantasy-relevant player, in my opinion, Kenyon Drake, might be dealing with a little foot injury. Apparently he's been walking around the past couple weeks in a walking boot. They got a pretty talented young tight end there, Mike Gesicki. That's probably the one guy I'm kind of keeping my eye on. And we'll kind of see how things evolve there, but they should be one of the bottom end offenses in football this year. So honestly, I'm just staying away from it. If you listen to last week's episode, you know how I feel about headaches and trying to figure out what players on what teams are going to be getting the carries and the touches and the targets. Honestly, on this Dolphins team, I don't think it really matters. They're going to be playing from behind so much. You pretty much throw whatever game plan they come into the week with, throw it out the window. They should be pretty bad. The next team is the Minnesota Vikings. It's hard to drink beer while you're doing a podcast by yourself, but I'm getting through it. They promote quarterbacks coach let's see if I can get this, Stefanski, offensive coordinator. I think the Vikings end up a little more balanced this year, kind of what Zimmer wanted going into last year, which they couldn't get from John DeFilippo. I think you see a much more efficient Kirk Cousins. I think you see them try and get the ball a little bit more to Dalvin Cook. He's going to be involved in the pass game. I think this is the season for them where they kind of have to, rely on him. They've been patient with him dealing with his injuries over the past 2 years, but this is the year they went out and they drafted a running back to back him up since they let Latavius Murray go. It's time for Dalvin Cook to take that step forward and become a every week type of player, and not this guy that we have to worry about from week to week whether or not he's going to play or whether a hamstring is flaring up or whatever it happens to be. The next and final team, or final new offensive coordinator, head coach, Adam Gase with the New York Football Jets, my beloved Football Jets. He'll be calling plays for a completely reloaded offense. I've never been more excited about a Jets offense than I am right now since my roommate in college woke me up one morning and told me that we got Brett Favre. They bring on Lev Bell, they bring on Ty Montgomery, they add Jamison Crowder. They got a lot of talent there to go along with guys from last year like Quincy Enunwa and Robbie Anderson and Chris Herndon. They got some players there, and Gase has worked with Peyton Manning in the past, so I expect the second-year quarterback Sam Darnold to take a step forward in 2019. Anybody who gets the praise of Peyton Manning and gets the stamp of approval from him obviously knows what he's doing, and obviously knows how to talk with quarterbacks and how to help quarterbacks. So I'm excited about Sam Darnold. I think hopefully we don't see any sophomore slump from him. I think we should see some big things from him this year. The Jets, although I did, just ramble off a whole bunch of talented players that they got, they don't really have a truly number one receiver. And with Bell and Montgomery having the ability to catch passes out of the backfield, I think Gase is going to spread the ball around just like he did with the Dolphins. And if you look at slot receivers on the Dolphins last year, with Adam Gase calling plays, they actually had a pretty good stat line. They caught a hell of a lot of passes. Although they don't have that number one guy that you're going to funnel 10, 11 targets to a week, they got plenty of guys that they can, move it wherever they want, including, Quincy Enunwa, who's really more of he looks more like a tight end, but he plays like a linebacker and he can run routes like a seasoned vet wide receiver. With Jamison Crowder running the slot, a couple of years ago with Washington, we saw him have a really good year out of the slot. So I'm very excited about these wide receivers with the Jets, especially Jamison Crowder. And I think Lev Bell, he should see close to the amount of work in the passing game that he saw with the Steelers. I'm not sure if we'll see him get as many carries. But maybe the Jets decide, hey, we want to use Montgomery as the primary pass-catching running back and just use Bell as our primary running back. I don't know what their plan's going to be, but whatever it is, should be exciting. They got some pretty good backups there as well with Bilal Powell. I think they got plenty of talent there on that offense, but the guys I'm most excited for are the wide receivers, and specifically Jamison Crowder. So that is the teams with new play callers on offense. Damn, 25 minutes, just that. Whew, I got to talk a little faster. Sorry, guys. As I take a sip of my beer. So moving on to tight ends, kind of mentioned a couple tight end situations in that rundown, but we're going to dive a little bit deeper into some of these tight ends. So a lot has been said in the offseason about regression for these top-tier tight ends, like Travis Kelce, George Kittle, Zach Ertz. There's a lot of people out there saying there's no way that all three of them can put up the same numbers that they did last year, but I beg to differ. Maybe the one guy that I see having the most regression out of the three has to be Zach Ertz, but the other two, I strongly disagree. Travis Kelce last year, he's coming off of career high in receptions, targets, yards, touchdowns, played with Patrick Mahomes, and with no Gronk, Kelce is clearly the best tight end in fantasy football. And especially in PPR leagues, he's easily a top 16 player, period. He's essentially a top-tier wide receiver in a tight end's body. With no Kareem Hunt this year, that means that there's a possibility of more pass plays being called. I don't know if they're going to run the ball with Darwin Thomas and Damian Williams as much as they did last year. So that should, if they're going to be passing the ball more than they did, that should see a spike in targets for Kelce, and plus, with the addition of the second-round pick wide receiver Mecole Hardman, another speedster to work on the other side of Tyreek Hill, man, when they have Tyreek on one side and Hardman on the other side, you run those guys deep, the middle of the field should be completely empty, and Kelce is going to wreak havoc on those defenses. So, honestly, I don't see him regressing at all. If anything, I think he's going to be even better. The other guy that last year, George Kittle, he played with 3 different quarterbacks, and yet he still put up the 3rd most fantasy points among tight ends. That's half-point PPR. In case you didn't hear last week's episode, anytime you hear us on this podcast refer to players or stats, it's always going to be half-point PPR, 12-team league. I feel like that's the most common league settings there, so that's kind of the format we're going to go by on this podcast. So if Jimmy Garoppolo stays healthy, I don't see why George Kittle can't be a top 5 tight end again, probably top 3. I would not be surprised at all if at the end of the season we're looking at these 3 dudes as the top 3 tight ends again. The third one, Zach Ertz, who I think could be in line for the most regression. He led his team in targets last year by 60, the second most fantasy points among tight ends. And yeah, he has a very talented tight end behind him. Honestly, it almost seems like he's equally as talented, maybe not as polished of a route runner, but he's got the hands, the speed, the size. But I don't see the Eagles moving away from Ertz just because they have another tight end that's really good, and I'm talking about Dallas Goedert. Let's say he loses 1, 2, maybe 3 targets a week to Goedert. He'd still be in the top 3, 4 in targets among tight ends. So, plus, this offense seems totally capable of supporting both tight ends. They bring on Deshaun Jackson back, and they got Alshon Jeffrey, and they got Nelson Aguilar. But I mean, they're still going to use these tight ends. They're uber talented. They're easy targets because they're so big, they're so fast. So I don't see him getting away. Honestly, I wouldn't be worried about regression among any of them. Maybe Ertz of any of the 3. Next guy I want to talk about is Vance McDonald. So with Jesse James now in Detroit, McDonald seems in line to take the majority of James's 39 targets from last year, including his 5 red zone targets. So even if he only takes 27 of those 39 targets from Jesse James from last year, that would still put McDonald at 100 targets, which would put him in the top 6 for targets among tight ends from last year. So he's going to see those targets. He's going to most likely be a 100-target guy. And plus, there's no Antonio Brown there, and that's another 169 targets that need to be redistributed. Yes, they got some talented guys. They bring on Dante Moncrief, and they got James Washington. And if there's any team in the league that has proved that they can mold wide receivers, it's the Pittsburgh Steelers. I mean, you go back from Hines Ward, you're talking Mike Wallace, you're talking Emmanuel Sanders and Antonio Brown and Martavis Bryant, now Juju Smith-Schuster. None of these guys were really all that touted coming out of college. They weren't, first-round picks by any means, and yet they just keep churning out ridiculous wide receiver talent there in Pittsburgh. So, yes, they have some other talent on the outside to deal with, but I think McDonald, I think he could be one of the have some of the most upside among tight ends this year because simply is that there's just so many targets to go around with the departure of Jesse James and Antonio Brown. I love Vance McDonald. If I can get him in the middle of the draft, I'm doing it. Evan Ingram, especially, he essentially is a wide receiver, but he plays tight end. And with no Odell Beckham there and no Golden Tate for the first 4 games, you're talking about 124 targets left behind by OBJ. So, and 20 of those targets were in the red zone. If there's one player on the Giants who should see the majority of red zone targets, it's Evan Ingram. He racked up 115 targets in his rookie year in 2017, and he was on his way to hitting 100 targets last year, but he was dealing with some knee injuries, and I think he had some hamstring stuff as well. And he's going to be relied on to take the load here, especially in the beginning of the season with no Golden Tate. He's really the only threat offensively besides Saquon Barkley, obviously, and I guess Sterling Shepard. But Sterling Shepard's not a number 1 receiver. So although Ingram should see a lot more targets than he got last year, he probably will see just as much added attention because, again, there's no Odell there. They can kind of key on Evan Ingram. So he should see a big uptick in targets, but I'm not so sure if he's going to end up being a top 3, top 4 tight end. He's definitely going to be in the top 10 just because solely they have nobody else to throw the ball to there. And then I'm looking at Hunter Henry as another guy who I'm really excited about. Hopefully I can get him somewhere in the middle of the draft. With no Antonio Gates to compete with there, Hunter Henry has the chance to really break out this year. Rivers has shown the ability to support a number 1 fantasy tight end while still supporting multiple wide receivers. They got some good wide receivers there in Keenan Allen and Mike Williams. So he's still going to get them the ball, but I think Hunter Henry could have a big year this year. There's no reason to think that Henry can't produce the same that Gates did in his heyday. Henry, obviously Antonio Gates is a Hall of Famer, but Hunter Henry has just as much ability as he did. He's super talented, and they had, with that offense kind of being in flux right now with the whole Melvin Gordon situation. I think having that reliable tight end that Philip Rivers can count on, especially we got some injury things lingering for Keenan Allen and Mike Williams going into his sophomore year. There's always that fear of the sophomore slump, but I think Hunter Henry could have a solid year this year. So I'm excited about getting him somewhere in the middle of the draft if possible. Jared Cook is another very interesting guy here. He broke the 100-target mark last year. He had a career high in receptions and yards and touchdowns. He's now playing with a first-ballot Hall of Famer, no doubt. Drew Brees is going to get him the ball. They've been one of the most high-scoring, most prolific offenses with head coach Sean Payton calling plays. And, if you remember from 2011 to 2014, we saw Jimmy Graham kind of explode and become that new, the new Gronk, I guess. He averaged over 88 receptions on 137 targets in those years. So last year, Saint tight ends were only targeted 89 times, and they only caught 63 of them. So I think we're going to see that those tight end plays in the playbook kind of get dusted off here with the arrival of Jared Cook. With lots of room to improve. They got an uber talented team there, obviously, with the rest of the guys they got on offense. And, like I said, I think they've shown the ability to showcase a tight end. I think they're going to do that with Jared Cook. They love throwing the ball to Michael Thomas on the goal line. So I don't know if Jared Cook will see as many red zone targets as Jimmy Graham saw in those years when he was dominating, but he'll still get plenty of targets in the red zone just because he's such a big dude. Those tight ends are pretty awesome matchups there in the red zone for quarterbacks there. So I like Jared Cook as well. He's another guy I'm totally fine with getting in the middle of the draft. O.J. Howard with the Tampa Bay Bucks. With the talent that they have on the outside in Tampa with Mike Evans, Chris Godwin, Howard should see plenty of opportunities in the middle of the field. As I pointed out earlier, Bruce Arians is one of the most aggressive play callers. And in the past 12 years as an offensive coordinator or as a head coach calling plays, the tight ends, the only tight ends worth note that he's worked with, Jermaine Gresham, Kobe Fleener, Dwayne Allen, Heath Miller. Some of these guys I'm sure are fantasy players that you might be familiar with if you've been playing for a while, but none of them were as talented as O.J. Howard. So I look forward to seeing what Bruce Arians can do with this guy at tight end, considering the weapons that he also has around him. Another uber talented tight end, a lot of these dudes, David Njoku. Last year with Hugh Jackson playing calls, Njoku was definitely held back from being, a top 10 tight end, which he's obviously more than capable of being. And with new head coach Freddie Kitchens, I expect Njoku to flourish. He's got freakish talent, and he's got huge red zone upside. They do have a lot of guys to get the ball to there in Cleveland now, but I think Njoku should see plenty of targets, and he should be top 10 tight end, no problem. With OBJ there, Njoku's target share will definitely suffer a little bit, but I think he can still get to the 85, 90 targets, which is still pretty impressive. So if he can get that, I expect him to be in the top 10 for tight ends easily. The next guy I want to talk about is Chris Herndon, who I kind of alluded to when I was talking about the Jets earlier. He's got a 4-game suspension to start the season, but coming back after those 4 games, he's definitely got the skill and the talent to make him a top 12 tight end easily. With Le'Veon Bell posing the only real red zone threat on the team and no true number 1 receiver, as I alluded to earlier, Herndon should be the focus of the offense when they get down to the red zone, at least in the passing game. With Robbie Anderson stretching the field, Jamison Crowder working the shallow crossers and the underneath routes, I expect Herndon to be able to really do work on the second level of those defenses, really attack those linebackers. The Jets have 2 great pass catchers, obviously, like I said, with Bell and Montgomery, which may hurt his target share a little bit. And obviously with those 4-game suspension, Herndon, he most likely is not going to get drafted in a lot of leagues, but I'm more than fine, especially if I miss out on one of those tight ends that I like. I'm totally fine with taking someone just to hold me over for the first 4 weeks and drafting Chris Herndon with my last pick and kind of holding on to him, knowing that come week 5, I'm going to have a tight end that's going to be involved in what should be a pretty good offense. The next tier is these guys that we have with the Lions. And my notes here are pre the Andrew Luck retirement, which was obviously shocking. I was hanging out with a buddy at his house on Saturday, and when we saw it come across the ticker, we were both kind of stunned. It's pretty ridiculous to think, they finally got him an offensive line. That offensive line is clearly top 5 in the league. They finally got him what looks to be like a pretty solid number 1 running back in Marlon Mack. They still got T.Y. there. They drafted, what's his name? Paris, I think, rookie wide receiver to go along on the other side. They've been kind of going for some other wide receivers over the past couple of years, but now they got these 2 good tight ends in Eric Ebron, Jack Doyle. They got finally they got a good defense, and Andrew Luck calls it quits, man. It's pretty ridiculous. But, I mean, he says he's in pain every day, and he's, lost the heart to play. And, I mean, if there's one thing that you need to play professional football, you got to want to play. You can't go out there and half-ass it, or you're going to get hurt. I think he kind of owes it to his teammates and the fans and the Colts. If he's not 100% into it, then he shouldn't play. And I respect him for that, to be honest. He's walking away from a hell of a lot of money, but dude's obviously very smart. Graduated from Stanford. I think he's got a degree in like architecture or something, so he'll be just fine. He's gonna be totally fine. So, but these guys with the Lions now, obviously they see a pretty significant downtick in value. Ebron emerged as Luck's favorite red zone target last year. 21 red zone targets, 10th in the league among red zone targets. But in 2017, Jack Doyle was second on the team in targets with 108, one less than T.Y. Hilton. So they were pretty much tied for the targets. Ebron will most likely, almost certainly, fail to hit that 100-target mark again, especially without Andrew Luck there now. I think they're going to turn into a much more conservative offense. They're going to rely on that awesome offensive line that they've put together and Marlon Mack, and I think they're going to kind of tell Jacoby Brissett to make plays on third down and take his shots when he can, but I think they're going to kind of sit back on that defense and the running game and try and win games. And he's going back to Eric Ebron, he's definitely going to fail to hit that 13 touchdown mark that he hit last year, especially with Jack Doyle there healthy. I'm avoiding Ebron on draft day, and honestly, now that Luck's not there, I'm honestly going to avoid Doyle as well. Maybe I can use him as a streamer somewhere through the season if these guys do still get drafted, or if they don't get drafted, but. I'm kind of down on these tight ends with the Colts now that Andrew Luck is gone. But we'll see. Couple weeks into the season, maybe Jacoby Brissett looks pretty good. Maybe he's not a complete dumpster fire, and he can hold up one of these tight ends. I mean, it doesn't take much for a tight end to be in the top 10, especially a guy that has red zone upside like Ebron and a guy like Jack Doyle who's showed that he can catch the ball, he can take a big target share and produce for you. So we'll see what happens there. Another tight end that's exciting, Trey Burton. He had his best year last year after signing with the Bears on a big deal. He was kind of a letdown, though, considering his size and his ability and we saw what he could do in the Super Bowl when he threw the Philly special. But I feel like he could finish above the number 7 tight end in fantasy points like he did last year. I think he could be in the top 5, especially with a third year with Mitch Trubisky. Hopefully they can take that leap forward, and maybe we can see another good season out of Trey Burton. Another guy that I alluded to earlier, Austin Hooper. He quietly put up number 6 tight end numbers in half PPR last year and full PPR, actually, both formats. He's played in all 16 games, both of the last 2 seasons, so he's durable. Like I said, he's one of the safest tight ends. And again, Dirk Cutter knows how to use tight ends. He knows how to use them in the red zone. He knows how to scheme for them. So I think Austin Hooper is a great pick late. Dallas Goedert. Now this may be kind of avant-garde, but he plays the same position as Zach Ertz, obviously, and Goddard is one of the most, if not the most, second-string tight end in football. And last year when he replaced Trey Burton, he had a great year considering his target share. He was used very minimally, but 4 touchdowns might be his floor with Ertz healthy, which is what he had last year. But I think Goddard could be the only tight end worth drafting as a handcuff. I know it may sound crazy, but in a full-point PPR, if you got Zach Ertz, you're playing him every week. The only week you're going to replace him is the week that he's on bye. And yeah, I hear you. It might be stupid to roster 2 tight ends on the same team that are going to have the same bye. But if you look back in the 5 games Ertz has missed 5 games between 2015 and 2017. And I think it was 2 games last year where Ertz missed, and Goddard had awesome games. I actually last year, I think the league that I went 0 RB, I drafted I drafted Ertz, and on the week that that Ertz was hurt, I was able to pick up Goddard off the waiver wire, and I think he got me 2 touchdowns that week. So, if Ertz goes down, Goddard automatically jumps into top 3, top 4 tight end, especially as far as workload goes, because he will see that target share because the Eagles love throwing the ball to those tight ends. Another guy is Kyle Rudolph, who last year in Kirk Cousins' first season at the helm in Minnesota, Rudolph was the number 8 tight end in half PPR. I thought he didn't have that good of a season, but I guess he did. His output was significantly less than his that one season, his career high when he had 132 targets, 82 catches, and 7 touchdowns. He was a red zone beast that year. Unfortunately, it doesn't seem like Cousins looks enough to him in the red zone. He was 3rd on the team in red zone targets last year to the 2 wide receivers. But again, if you're talking about a safe tight end that you can pretty much guarantee at the end of the season he's going to be in the top 12, you're talking Kyle Rudolph. And again, you can get him late. If you might even be able to just wait and get him with your last pick. And as I was talking about earlier, those tight ends with the Baltimore Ravens, you got Mark Andrews, Hayden Hurst, Nick Boyle. The tight ends were targeted 27% of Lamar Jackson's 158 pass attempts as a starter in 10 games last year. Got that from Pro Football Reference. So if Lamar Jackson starts 16 games, and let's say he makes 400 attempts, which is an easy number to hit considering they want to, use him more as a traditional quarterback. They don't really want to run him 25 times a game. He's going to get hurt. So if, let's say, he throws the ball 400 times, it's pretty easy to say that I think the tight ends will get at least 25% of that target share. So the Ravens used a first-round pick last year on Hayden Hurst. He's super versatile. And he should push Mark Andrews for that starting role. But honestly, I don't think it matters. I think they're going to use them both. Even if Andrews and Hurst split 45-45 as far as the tight end target share, leaving Nick Boyle with 10%, if so, that's still 45 to 50 targets each. It's going to be an interesting year to see what they do with these tight ends and who's going to take that number 1 role. But with them both being you can get them both late in drafts. I think either one of them is worth the pick. Obviously, Andrews is probably a little safer. Hurst might have a little more upside considering, where he was drafted and his abilities. But we're going to move on to a couple older tight ends. These are the last tight ends of the segment here. All these guys are super talented. They all have had great seasons in the NFL, but they're just getting old, and they have so many injuries. Obviously, the first one that comes to mind is Tyler Eifert. He might have had some of the most talented. He might have been one of the most talented tight ends coming into the league when he did. But ankle, leg, and ligament damage, history of multiple back surgeries. He's had shoulder problems, elbow problems. It's just too much, man. I can't keep a guy on my roster that I'm not going to know I'm going to be able to play him every week. So I'm not even going to bother. I'm not going to take the chance. And again, he's playing in an offense that maybe isn't going to really feature tight ends as much as we'd like to see him featured. The next guy is Greg Olsen. Multiple foot fractures. He had a torn plantar fascia. Back-to-back seasons. Again, he's just another guy that is super risky, obviously very talented, and he plays for a team that should put up points if Cam Newton's healthy. But again, I can't risk having a guy that is going to be hurt. Delaney Walker last year, he dislocated and fractured his ankle. He's 35 years old. He's another guy I'm staying away from. That team loves to run the ball. There's just other tight ends that you can pick. And probably the last one who I've had on my roster multiple years, and I've always had to deal with his concussion problems and his leg problems. That's Jordan Reed. He seems to every year he's got something. He gets banged up somehow. So although he's super talented, and again I think he's in concussion protocol right now as we speak. I think he had something happen in the second preseason game, so it's already started. So that's a group of tight ends that I'm avoiding. I'm going after one of those guys that I mentioned in the first part of that tight end breakdown. So that does it for this episode. We went a little bit longer than I planned on. I didn't think it would take me that long to get through all that, but hopefully that gives you some insight into the tight ends this year, helps you kind of evaluate where you want to use your draft capital on your tight end position, and hopefully some of that stuff on the new offensive coordinators and new play callers can kind of give you a little bit of hope for certain players and see what these new offensive coordinators can do on the new team. So we will talk to you soon. Thanks for tuning in, and may the fantasy gods be cruel to your opponent.
You have been listening to the Beers and Bruisers Fantasy Football Podcast. For more episodes and information, follow us on social media and tune in every week. Beers and Bruisers is available on Google Podcasts, iTunes, iHeartRadio, Spotify, Alexa, Reach TV, or your favorite podcast service. Beers and Bruisers is a proud member of the HC Universal Network family of podcasts. To find out more about this and other great shows on our network, visit us online at hcuniversalnetwork.com or download the free HC Universal Network app today. Fantasy football is fun, but gambling addiction destroys lives. If you or someone you love suffers from gambling addiction, please do not be afraid to seek help. The National Council on Problem Gaming operates a national problem gambling helpline network. Contact them today at 1-800-522-4700. Thank you for tuning in to the Beers and Bruisers Fantasy Football Podcast. Please remember to drink responsibly and always look for your man downfield.